The morning of my brother's wedding, I was in the hotel bathroom doing my own makeup because no one had thought to include me in the bridal party preparations. That should have told me everything I needed to know about how the day was going to go. I'd driven 4 hours from Columbus to Cincinnati for this. I'd paid for the rehearsal dinner, $1,200, at an Italian place my sister-in-law had picked out without asking me what I could afford. I'd written a check for the florist deposit when my parents said they were a little short that month. I'd done all of this quietly, without announcing it, because that's what I thought family did. You helped. You didn't make it about yourself. My name is Vera, and I was 31 years old, standing in a Marriott bathroom with a mascara wand in my hand, listening to my mom laugh at something through the wall, and I told myself, today is about my brother. Just get through today. I should back up. My brother Colin is 3 years younger than me. Growing up, he was the one who could do no wrong. Not because my parents were cruel. They weren't, not exactly. But because Colin was easier. He was louder, funnier, quicker to ask for things. I was the one who figured things out on my own. Got a scholarship for undergrad, worked through grad school, landed a project management job at a logistics firm in Columbus that paid me well enough that by 28, I had a savings account that actually meant something. My parents knew I was doing okay. I think that was the problem. It started small. My dad's truck needed a repair. Could I lend him $400? Of course. My mom wanted to take a trip to visit her sister in Florida. Could I chip in? Sure, I chipped in $300. Colin's girlfriend, who would later become his wife, needed help with her security deposit when they moved in together. My parents asked me to help, just this once. I wired $800. None of it was ever paid back. None of it was ever really mentioned again. Except when they needed something else. By the time Colin got engaged, I had quietly given or lent my family somewhere around $9,000 over 3 years. I had a spreadsheet. I'm not proud of the spreadsheet. But I had one. Here's what I didn't have: any acknowledgement that this was happening. Any thank you that felt real. Any sense that my parents saw me as something other than a resource that refilled itself automatically. When Colin announced the engagement, my mom called me first. Not to ask if I was okay with being asked to help pay for things, to tell me what things she needed help paying for. The venue is $18,000, she said. Your father and I can do 6. Colin and Amber's families are splitting the rest. But there's still a gap. I asked how big the gap was. We were hoping you could do 2,000. I said I'd think about it. That was apparently the wrong answer, because 3 days later my dad called and said in this careful, measured tone, Vera, this is your brother's wedding. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I sent the $2,000. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't broke. I could afford it. That's not the point. The point is that no one asked. No one said, hey, we know we've leaned on you a lot, would you be willing to help? It was always assumed. It was always framed as something I owed the family for having the audacity to be financially stable, and I kept paying because I didn't know how to be the person who said no. My boyfriend at the time, his name is Marco, and he was the first person who ever made me feel like my feelings about my family were valid. Marco had been watching all of this for 2 years. He'd seen me come home from family visits tense and quiet. He'd see me open my banking app and stare at it after a phone call from my mom. He never told me what to do. But one night, about a month before the wedding, he said something that I've thought about almost every day since. He said, Vera, do you think they'd ask Colin to do any of this? I didn't answer right away. I already knew the answer. Colin had never once been asked to be the financial buffer. Colin had never been called when there was a gap to fill. Colin was the one being celebrated. I was the one being used to pay for the celebration. They see you as responsible, Marco said. But responsible isn't the same as obligated. I kept that with me. I didn't do anything with it yet. But I kept it. The wedding was on a Saturday in October. The venue was a restored barn outside Cincinnati. Beautiful, genuinely beautiful, with string lights and a wooden dance floor and a catering team that did this slow-roasted brisket that I'm still thinking about. I sat at a table near the back with Marco and 2 of Colin's college friends I'd met maybe twice. The head table had my parents, my brother and his new wife, her parents, and her two sisters. I wasn't at the head table. I wasn't in the wedding party. I had been asked to do a reading during the ceremony, which I prepared for and delivered, and then I'd gone back to my seat, and that was the extent of my involvement. At dinner, my dad stood up to give a toast. He talked about Colin growing up, about how proud he was, about what a wonderful woman Amber was, and how lucky Colin was to have found her. It was a good toast. My dad is actually a decent speaker when he wants to be. I was smiling. I was genuinely happy for my brother. And then my dad said, "And of course we want to thank Amber's family for making all of this possible." He listed them, her parents by name. Her aunt who had flown in from Phoenix, her grandfather who had made a donation in lieu of a gift. He did not say my name. He did not gesture toward me. He did not acknowledge, in any way, that I had written checks that made that venue, that catering, those flowers possible. I kept smiling. I am very good at keeping smiling. But Marco's hand found mine under the table, and he squeezed once, and I knew he'd noticed. After dinner, during the dancing portion of the night, my mom came and sat next to me. I thought for a moment that she was going to say something. Acknowledge something. She'd had 2 glasses of wine. Sometimes that made her softer. Instead, she said, "You know, it's really wonderful to see what Colin's built for himself. He's so settled now. Amber is wonderful. Their life is just going to be so stable." I said that was great. She said, "I just sometimes wonder when you're going to settle down. You work so much. Don't you want what Colin has?" I looked at Marco, who was dancing with one of Amber's cousins because he is genuinely a good person who talks to strangers at weddings. I thought about the $9,000. I thought about the $2,000 for the venue that my dad had just thanked everyone except me for. I thought about the 4-hour drive I'd made, the rehearsal dinner I'd funded, the reading I prepared, the seat near the back. I said, "I'm doing fine, Mom." She patted my hand and went back to the dance floor. I sat there for a while after that. Not crying. I wasn't going to cry at my brother's wedding. But something had settled in me. Something had gone quiet in a way that felt different from the usual quiet I used to manage my feelings about my family. This wasn't suppression, this was clarity. On the drive back to Columbus that night, Marco didn't push me to talk. He just drove, and I watched the highway lights, and somewhere around Dayton I said out loud, "I think I'm done." He said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. Like he'd been waiting for me to catch up to something he'd seen a long time ago. Over the next 2 weeks, I made some decisions. Not dramatic ones, not yet. I wasn't ready to blow anything up, but I stopped being the person who preemptively offered. When my mom called with a story that I recognized was leading somewhere financial, I let her finish and then said, "I'm not really in a position to help right now." When my dad texted asking if I could spot him for something, I said I was tight this month. Both of these things were lies. I was not tight, but I needed to practice saying no before I could say the bigger no. The bigger no came in January, about 3 months after the wedding. My parents called me on a Sunday evening, both of them on the line, which was never a good sign. The 2 of them together meant they'd rehearsed something, and my dad explained that they were looking at some home repair expenses and wondering if I could help with a portion. The number he said was $4,000. I had been expecting this call. Not that specific number, but that call. I'd thought about what I wanted to say. I'd actually written notes, which Marco had read and helped me refine, because I have a tendency to either over-explain or cave entirely when I'm on the phone with my parents. I said, "Dad, I want to talk to you both about something before we get into that." There was a pause. My mom said, "Okay." I said I'd been thinking a lot about our family's financial dynamic. I said I wanted to be honest with them. Over the past 3 years, I had given Erlent the family approximately $9,000, none of which had been repaid or acknowledged in any formal way. I said I wasn't bringing this up to be hurtful. I was bringing it up because I cared about our relationship and I couldn't keep pretending this pattern didn't exist. My dad said, "Vera, we're your family." I said I knew that. My mom said, "We would never ask you for anything we didn't really need." I said I understood that's how it felt from their side. I said from my side it had felt like a pattern where my stability was treated as a family resource without any conversation about whether I was okay with that. There was a long silence. My dad said, "I can't believe you're keeping score." I had expected this. Marco had predicted this exact phrasing, which tells you something about how predictable this kind of conversation can be. I said, "I'm not keeping score. I'm being transparent. I think there's a difference." My mom started crying. I had also expected this, and I want to be fair to her. I don't think the crying was manipulative, exactly. I think she genuinely felt blindsided. I think she had genuinely not been tracking the same things I had been tracking. That's almost worse in a way. That she hadn't noticed because she hadn't needed to. I said I loved them. I said I was not cutting them off. I said I was not going to be a person who could help with $4,000 right now, and I needed them to start thinking of me as someone with limits. My dad hung up. Not violently. Just the call ended. My mom said goodbye before she hung up, which felt like something. I put my phone down and Marco made us tea and we sat on the couch and I waited to feel terrible. I mostly felt tired, and under the tired, something else. Something I hadn't felt in 3 years of Sunday phone calls. I felt like myself. The next few months were hard in a different way than I'd expected. I prepared for anger from my family, and I got some of that. My dad was cold and clipped on the phone for a while. My mom sent a few texts that were pointed in the way only moms can be pointed, asking how I was doing in a tone that communicated she thought I wasn't doing well enough to justify my choices. Colin called once, about 6 weeks later, and asked what was going on with me and mom and dad. I told him the truth as simply as I could. I said I'd been financially supporting the family for years, and I decided I needed to stop. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't know you were doing that." I believed him. Colin isn't calculating. He's just oblivious, which is its own problem. But not the same problem. He said, "That's a lot, Vera." I said, "Yeah, it was." He didn't apologize on their behalf or try to fix anything, but he called me the following week just to check in, which was more than he'd done in the previous 3 years, so I counted it. What surprised me most was my own parents' adjustment. I'd expected it to take longer. I'd expected more conflict, more guilt, more pressure. Instead, about 4 months after that phone call, my mom called on a Saturday morning and said she'd been thinking about what I said. She said she didn't fully understand my perspective, but she was trying to. She said she knew she and my dad relied on me more than they'd relied on Colin, and she didn't have a good answer for why that was, except that I'd always seemed like I could handle it. "That's the thing," I said. "Just because I can handle it doesn't mean I should have to." She said she heard me. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't, not completely. But the fact that she called to say it meant something to me, so I let it mean something. My dad took longer. My dad is the kind of man who experiences being told he's wrong as a form of injury. We're still working on that. We talk on the phone every couple of weeks. It's not warm exactly, but it's not cold either. It's what it is. In April, Marco asked me to marry him in the kitchen while I was making pasta on a Tuesday night, which sounds low-key but was exactly right for us. I said yes before he finished asking. We're planning something small. 30 people, maybe 40. A restaurant we love on the east side of Columbus. I'm paying for what I want to pay for. Marco's family is contributing what they can. My parents have offered to help with some costs, and I've accepted the offers that felt clean, and declined the ones that came with an undercurrent I recognized. What I know now that I didn't know 3 years ago is this. Generosity is only generosity when it's a choice. For a long time, I wasn't being generous. I was being compliant. I was paying to keep the peace, paying to be seen as good, paying because it was easier than having the conversation. And the price of avoiding that conversation, it turned out, wasn't just $9,000. It was 3 years of feeling invisible at my own family's table. The morning of my brother's wedding, I was in a hotel bathroom doing my own makeup, listening to my mom laugh through the wall, telling myself to just get through the day. I got through it. And then I got through a lot of other things after that. The getting through was the easy part, as it turns out. The harder part was deciding I deserved more than just getting through. Marco would say I'm being dramatic when I say it felt like finally breathing after holding my breath for years. He's probably right that it's a little dramatic. But standing in my own kitchen in April, saying yes with pasta water boiling behind me, I thought about that hotel bathroom and the mascara and the seat near the back and the toast my dad gave where he thanked everyone who had made that day possible. He just hadn't known yet who that was. I've thought a lot about why it took me so long. 3 years of writing checks, wiring money, filling gaps, and I kept doing it not because anyone forced me to, but because I had convinced myself that being needed was the same as being loved. That's the part I had to sit with. Not what my parents did, but what I allowed, and why. There's a version of this story where I'm the victim the whole way through. And honestly, for a long time that's how I told it to myself. My dad gave that toast and didn't say my name, and I sat there with a smile on my face and Marco's hand in mine, and I thought, look what they've done to me. But somewhere on that drive back to Columbus, somewhere around Dayton when I said I think I'm done, I started to understand that the story was more complicated than that. Because the truth is, I had trained them. Every time I said yes when I should have said let me think about it. Every time I transferred money without a conversation. Every time I let a thank you slide because I didn't want to make things awkward. I was teaching everyone around me that this was okay. That I was okay with it. People learn how to treat you from how you let them treat you, and I had been a very patient teacher of all the wrong lessons. What changed me wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger was there, sure. Sitting in that seat near the back of a venue I'd helped pay for, listening to my dad list names that weren't mine. I felt it. But anger alone doesn't build anything. What actually changed me was Marco asking that one quiet question. Do you think they'd ask Colin to do any of this? That question required me to be honest with myself in a way I'd been avoiding. And honesty, real honesty about your own patterns, takes a kind of courage that no one talks about enough. It's not the dramatic courage of grand gestures. It's the small, unglamorous courage of looking at something uncomfortable and deciding not to look away. The hardest call I ever made was that Sunday in January, with my notes in front of me and Marco making tea in the kitchen. Not because I was afraid of my parents, I was, a little. But because I was afraid of who I'd be if I didn't make it. I had spent so long being the responsible one, the capable one, the one who handled things, that I had confused being capable with being responsible for everyone else's problems. Those are not the same thing. Capability is a tool. What you do with it is a choice. And for 3 years I had been choosing, quietly and consistently, to make myself smaller so that everyone else could feel bigger. What I know now is that setting a limit isn't the same as giving up on people. I didn't stop loving my parents when I stopped sending money. I didn't stop wanting a relationship with my brother when I told him the truth about what had been happening. If anything, the relationships that survived that conversation got more real. My mom calling 4 months later to say she was trying to understand, that meant more to me than any of the easy Thanksgivings where everything was fine on the surface and I was quietly subsidizing the whole thing. You can't actually connect with people who only see you as a function, and you can't stop being a function until you decide you're worth more than that. That decision, quiet, private, made on a dark highway in October, was the most important thing I've ever done for myself. Not the call in January, not declining the $4,000 request. The decision. Everything else was just following through. Marco proposed in April. I said yes with pasta water boiling behind me, which is exactly the kind of unglamorous, completely perfect moment I would not have been available for if I'd still been the person who answered every call with yes before I'd even heard the question. I paid for my own seat at that wedding. I just didn't know it yet.